Hi, it's Justine from the Sacred Heart Homestead. I'm a wife and mother to 6 homesteading in Ontario. This week I want to share with you some of my large family's favorite springtime meals. I hope you stick around. When I think of springtime meals, I think about fresh flavors. For the past few months, we've been eating from our cellar and from our larder. And all those root vegetables that we have stored down there are starting to get old. I mean, they're still good, so I'm trying to find ways to use them up. But we want a little bit of freshness in the things that we eat when we see the snow melting and the birds coming out and all the wildlife coming back. Spring also means that I need quick and easy meals to prepare because I will be in the garden and outside all day. And the last thing I want to do is come back in and have to prepare a meal that's long and complicated to make. Those types of meals I save for autumn and for winter. The first meal I'm making actually uses some of the vegetables that we have stored away in our cellar, but brings them to life using some more interesting and my kids would say fun flavors. So this is a cheeseburger loaded baked potato. And it combines the flavors of a cheeseburger just on a baked potato for a super easy weeknight meal. To make this, I first off washed all my potatoes and I cut off any spots on them that I didn't like. And then I poked them with a fork, rubbed them all over with some oil, sprinkled some salt on top, and then I put them in an oven at 425. I left them in there for about 45 minutes to an hour, and that just depends on how big your potatoes are. If you're going to do this, try to pick potatoes that are all about the same size if you can. Afterwards, I cooked up some bacon, and then using that bacon fat, I put a diced onion right in my skillet and I cooked it in the bacon fat. Once the onion was cooked, I added a pound of ground beef to that same skillet and I just broke it up into chunks and I added some salt as well as some Worcestershire sauce to kind of give it like a burger flavor. While the hamburger meat was cooking, I got some more of our toppings ready. So I cut up some green onions, some lettuce, some tomatoes, some avocado. I also grated up a little bit of cheese, and I had some butter and some sour cream ready to go on top of that baked potato. I thought this was a really quick and easy meal. We've done baked potato bars before where the kids get to choose whatever they put on, and I've done them like a taco style, but I've never done cheeseburger style, and the kids love this combination. I also cut up some pickles. I forgot to say that earlier, to put on top of those baked potatoes as well, and that really enhanced the cheeseburger flavor. Finally, I crumpled up some bacon, so it was like a bacon cheeseburger, which is delicious. And then afterwards, we assembled the potatoes. So I think I put the butter on first so that it would melt a little bit of salt, and then we started packing on all the other toppings like the cheese and the sour cream and all of that. I assembled my son's baked potato first because he seemed to be the most excited about it. You can kind of see him a little bit just watching with excitement as I put everything on top of his cheeseburger baked potato. And these were truly a hit with our family. After cleaning up the supper dishes, I wanted to get ready some flatbread for the next day. And so in my mixer, I combined a cup of sourdough starter, a cup of milk, a cup of whole wheat flour, 4 cups of all-purpose flour, 2 tablespoons of maple syrup, and 2 teaspoons of salt. And then I mixed that all together for about 5 minutes. I took it out of there, rolled it into a ball, and then I covered it and let it rise overnight on my counter. The next day, I took out the dough I had fermented and I cut it up into 16 equal pieces. And then I took those 16 pieces, rolled it into a little ball, and then I rolled it out into a 1/4 inch thick disc so I could bake these into flatbreads. I usually end up cooking these in a skillet with some oil, but I wanted to save some time today because the kids wanted to eat outside, and so I had to go set up the table, and so I just tried to get everything done as quickly as possible. Tonight I decided to make a Greek style ground lamb and flatbread. And so first thing you gotta do if you're going to make any type of Greek type food is to cut up a bunch of garlic. So I think I did about 8 cloves over here. But I'm a huge garlic fan, and so is my family, so you could definitely do less if you wanted to. I added that to a skillet with some oil. And then I hopped over because I realized the oven was already preheated and I could put my flatbread in. So I did that and I put those in for about 10 minutes. And then I kept working on my skillet. The garlic was cooked at this point, so I added 2 pounds of ground lamb and I seasoned that with some cumin, some oregano, some paprika, some salt, and a few tablespoons of lemon juice. I cooked that until the lamb was no longer pink. Now I know not everybody is a huge fan of lamb, so you could always use beef or chicken if you wanted to. I'm curious to know if your family uses lamb and how you use it. Let me know in the comments below. While the lamb was cooking, I got started on the tzatziki because the longer it sits, the better the flavor. So I took a whole cucumber, an English one, and I took out all the seeds and the insides of it. I was going to give that to the chickens, but I actually had kids come by and they ate it up, so it did not get wasted. And while I was working on the tzatziki, the bread was ready, so I just pulled it out of the oven. And then I got right back to dealing with that cucumber. I used my shredder to grate it up, and then I threw it in a bowl. And to it, I added my garlic, a few tablespoons of fresh lemon juice, 2 cups of Greek yogurt. I made this Greek yogurt and I have a recipe for it on another video that I'm going to link down in the description. I also added some dill to this, and oddly enough, I added a tablespoon of maple syrup, and that's because I find it kind of cuts down the acidity of the Greek yogurt and makes it quite delicious. I also threw in some salt, and I mixed that all together and left it in my fridge for a few minutes just so the flavors would meld better together. And if you have longer than an hour and you're more organized than I am, it will taste absolutely delicious sitting there a little bit longer. Afterwards, I went ahead and I cut up some vegetables. So for this meal, I used some tomatoes, some lettuce, some red onion, and we had some crumbled feta cheese to put on top of our flatbreads as well. It was such a beautiful day outside, and the kids had been begging me to eat out there on our picnic table that my dad had built us last year. And so we set everything up and brought all our food outside, despite the fact that I kind of hate eating outside because I feel like it gets super buggy. But the kids love it, and we just enjoyed this delicious supper. We served our flatbreads with sauerkraut as always. The next day was another beautiful day, but I had so much garden work to do, and so I knew I had to choose a meal that would be very quick to get on the table. And so I chose to make one of our favorite slow cooker rotisserie chicken and black bean bowls. I'm not sure if you guys have noticed, but I only use full chickens, and there are two reasons for this. So the first one is that we butcher our own chickens, and on butchering day, I'm already so tired and exhausted from all the work we already have to do that the last thing I want to spend doing is breaking apart the chickens after I clean them out. But also, the second reason I like to use full chickens and why I use them even before we started butchering our own chickens is that I want to make bone broth with all the leftover bone. And I'm going to show you guys the easiest way to make bone broth, and that's in the slow cooker that I actually cooked my chicken in. So if you see what I did there, less dishes again, that seems to be a theme with me. So like I said, I was in the garden most of the afternoon, so the meal I made had to be really quick, which is good because the rotisserie chicken was done by the time we came in, and all I really needed to do was combine the other ingredients for the bowl. So I started with a bed of rice. I cook my rice using the juices from the chicken that I just cooked. I just add that into my measuring cup, and then I fill whatever rest of the ratio from water to liquid needs to be added. I also started heating up some frozen corn to put on top. I pickled some red onions. I just added white vinegar to some red onions. The kids really like that. I chopped up some green onions, some tomatoes, some avocado. I had some black beans that I had cooked earlier during the day, and so we put those on top. And I grated some cheese. I had some sour cream, some homemade salsa that we canned over the summer ready, some romaine lettuce. Like anything you can think of that you think might be good with this can go on top of this rice bowl. I also had time to take apart the chicken while the rice was cooking. And then I pulled all the meat off the bone, and I took those bones and I threw them directly into my slow cooker. I didn't even bother washing it. I just threw it in. And then I added my secret ingredient to get my bone broth to gel, and that's chicken feet. I added water to the slow cooker, just a little bit above covering, and then I added like 4 glugs of apple cider vinegar. I guess a glug could be counted as a tablespoon. I set the whole thing on high overnight, and in the morning, it had turned into bone broth. During the summer months, we do a lot of these bowl-type meals with rice or potatoes as a base and then adding on different stuff on top. I got this idea from Kendra, who has the Lazy Genius podcast and books. I really love this concept of having these super quick meals that everyone can customize for themselves. It always seems to make everyone happy, and especially if you have a bunch of kids and some of them are picky eaters, these meals are great because they get to choose exactly what they want on top. And so you hear less whining, and I actually find sometimes they get a little bit adventurous and they'll try like something spicy you wouldn't expect them to try just because they're able to have the choice. The next day, I had planned to go out and barbecue, but of course it was raining, and such a spring. Every time you make a plan to barbecue in the spring, it seems to rain, doesn't it? And so I had to regroup and figure out how to make this meal inside in my oven. So we are making some honey mustard pork chops with some fried potatoes. The first thing I did was make a homemade mayo using an egg, some lemon juice, some salt, some avocado oil, and emulsifying it with my immersion blender. And then to that, I added some Dijon mustard, some honey, some garlic powder, some paprika, and a little bit more salt. I mixed all of that together using my immersion blender again. Afterwards, I got my pork chops ready. I just heated up some oil in a pan, and then I seared each of my pork chops on both sides for about 2 minutes per side. Now, you don't want to overcrowd your pan because your pork chops won't sear. Instead, they're going to boil. So make sure you're leaving enough space. You might have to do this in batches. Afterwards, I put all the pork chops in a big pan, and I used the sauce I made, the honey Dijon mustard sauce, and I slathered it on top of all the pork chops on both sides. While waiting for the pork chops to sear, I decided to get started on getting some of my potatoes ready. That's probably one of the most important things I've learned in the kitchen, is to always keep moving and always try to do multiple tasks at once. So like while you're cooking something, you can be preparing something else like a side. Just to kind of sit there and wait for whatever I needed to be ready, which to think about was kind of silly. And now that I'm a better manager of my time in the kitchen, I know that it's important to just keep on moving to the next task. So after I put the sauce on the pork chops, I covered my pan. I don't recommend you do this. I did it because my oven had broken a few weeks ago. The oven you see in the back is just a cheap oven we found online that we bought used for like $150. And it's just kind of like a placeholder, but the temperatures inside the oven aren't super accurate. There's some hot spots and everything seems to cook kind of wonky. And so I wanted to try and retain the heat inside the pan as much as possible. But these pork chops are much better if you don't put foil on top of your pan. I put those in at 350 degrees for about 40 minutes and checked on them periodically. While those were cooking, I got the rest of my potatoes ready, so I diced these up in about 1-inch cubes, and then I put them in a bowl and I tossed them around with some lard. I cooked them in the same pan I was browning my pork chops in because I didn't want to wash those dishes again, and I added some salt on top. This is a pretty typical meal for us. We usually have some kind of meat and a potato, and then I serve everything with sauerkraut or a salad or some other kind of fermented vegetables. Everyone loves pork chops here, so there were no complaints, and it was all finished. There were no leftovers after we ate this. After supper, I checked again on my bone broth. I let this sit a little bit longer because I kept playing with the temperature gauge as I was watching kids and doing different stuff around the house. I didn't want to miss my time window and have it boil dry. And so I just let it cook until supper. And afterwards, I strained it off and the bone broth is ready. I got about a half gallon off this. The final day of the week, I wanted to use some very fresh spring flavors like asparagus, and so I decided to make a shrimp pasta with asparagus and lemon. First thing I did was I got a pot of water to boil on my new stove. Yes, I got a new stove. After my last oven broke down, my husband and I decided it was time that we got a stove that would actually function for our family size, and we ended up getting this electric range. And I'm very happy with it so far, even though I'm still trying to get used to it. So for this recipe, I used about 6 to 8 garlic cloves that I crushed up, and I also grated the zest of 1 lemon. I drained off all my shrimp and I dried them up as best as possible. I then added them to a bowl, to which I threw in some olive oil, that lemon zest, some salt, and a little bit of garlic powder. I let that whole mixture sit for a few minutes, and then I started cooking the shrimp in a skillet. And I just want to apologize to you guys. I've noticed my camera has been shaking a lot, and the reason for this is because my kids keep touching the tripod as they walk by or come ask me questions. And so every once in a while it'll shake a little bit. Just know that there's a child behind that, and I'm not jumping around or being crazy with the tripod or anything like that. Afterwards, I cut up all my asparagus in about 1-inch cubes, and I threw in my dried pasta into the boiling water. When placing the shrimp on my skillet, I make sure to leave enough room so that the pan wouldn't get overcrowded again and end up boiling the shrimp. You really want that nice crispiness on the outside. I cooked them about 2 minutes on each side, and then I did this in batches, so I put them in a bowl while waiting. I then took that lemon we had zested earlier and just squeezed out all the juice. I drained off the pasta, but first off, I kept about 1 cup of pasta water, and that's just to add to the sauce if ever I thought this was too dry. After draining the pasta, I added some asparagus to that pan I had cooked the same shrimp in. I used the rest of the juice that we had used to marinate the shrimp in as well. I cooked that all together, added the garlic in until it was fragrant, and I cooked the whole thing until it was tender. You could add the pasta back into this skillet at this point if the skillet was big enough. Mine was not, so I just added it all to the pasta pot along with some salt, some pepper, 2/3 of a cup of Parmesan cheese. I mixed it all together, and then I decided my pasta was too dry, and so instead of adding the pasta water, which you could do, I just added like a little tiny bit of olive oil, and that was sufficient for us. Of course, if you find it really, really dry, go ahead and add that pasta water in. The kids were huge fans of this meal. You could serve this with like a side salad or some garlic bread, or just eat it as is. We sprinkled some extra Parmesan right on top for serving. And that's all I have for you this week. Thank you so much for watching all this. If you enjoyed it, please go ahead and hit that like button. And if you're new here or you haven't done so already, please go ahead and subscribe. I'm here every Thursday with a new video. See you all next week.